My name's Eddie O'Neill. I actually work for Facebook out of our Seattle office with Jason, where we do a lot of our SDK engineering. And I'm a platform PM and have kind of product responsibility for a few different parts of our mobile developer experience, specifically the iOS SDK, the Android SDK, our Platform Insights product, and the iOS 6 integration we did with Apple this year. And I'm surprised, I haven't heard any questions about that yet, and so I'm really interested to hear what kinds of questions you guys have about that. And what I'm going to talk about today is basically getting started with the Facebook SDK for iOS. And I'm not exactly sure, I think it might be my J2E background, how you got stuck with me doing the intro session, but you did. We're going to walk through kind of 4 big chunks in this talk, and the third one is the one we're going to spend the most time, and that's building a real app. It's not going to be an app you'd put in the store, but it's one where we'll kind of demonstrate how a lot of the kind of designy, architect-y sort of things we did in the SDK all sort of hang together. So a little bit of background on the SDK. How many people used SDK pre-3.x, like 2.x SDK? OK, awesome. How many people have used, this is what Constantine did. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. How many people have used 3.x? Oh, interesting. OK. Well, some of this might be a repeat for some of you, but hopefully you'll learn some new things here too. In the spring, we took a big step back from our SDKs and decided that we wanted to invest because of the big shift we were seeing to mobile. We wanted to invest in doing a lot of really deep, interesting stuff on mobile around UI controls and programming models to make it interesting and easier for apps to integrate with Facebook. So we're going to kind of talk through 4 things there. So why use the SDK? Some details around the permission and authentication model, which I know that if you've seen the 3.x SDK, you know that we're starting to think a little bit differently there about how apps request permissions from people and separating read and write permissions, which I understand causes some pain. But in the long run, we think that's a transition that's worth making. We're going to go through and build an end-to-end app, and then we'll kind of just wrap up, summarize some key SDK features, some of which we won't have gotten to in the talk. So 4 big reasons for why to use the SDK. And some of you, although since most of you have raised your hand about 3.0, may not be asking the question, if we have a graph API and a bunch of public APIs for web dialogues, why we even need an SDK. But at the end of the day, there's a fair bit of complexity inherent in doing anything that relates to Facebook, partly because the authentication systems are so different and fragmented. You have iOS 6 auth, you have users that have the Facebook app installed, you have users that don't have the Facebook app installed and need to use Safari, and so on and so on. And we kind of simplify all of that. And on top of that is a kind of complex set of tokens and permissions and token expiration times and all that kind of stuff that we manage for you here as well. And in the previous SDK, we basically didn't help you do anything but get to the Facebook app to get a token and come back. Everything else was left to you. In the current SDK, we've kind of taken a very different approach, which is to help manage how all those tokens work. We store them for you. We help you create and bring these sessions back and do all this stuff that just kind of takes a lot of the heavy lifting you used to do and puts it on us, Jason in particular. So he'll talk to you in a little bit of detail about some of that. But native UI controls for common user-oriented operations. When we sat down and wrote a 1-page spec about this earlier this year, we were very focused on Open Graph. And one of the things we see apps doing with Open Graph is publishing actions that tag people and places. And so we kind of spun the native UI control work we were going to do in the SDK around doing that really easy. Improved API support. So again, one of the things in the 2.x SDK you saw was basically an API endpoint that said call, and it took a bunch of strings. And as you know, if you've done any maintenance of an app that makes calls to web addressable APIs over time, those things are very easy to break. They get stale quickly. Parameters change. You use the wrong verb. All kinds of chaos happens. Maybe not when you build the app, but as you maintain an app. And so we put a bunch of API support in place for doing strongly typed things with the Facebook APIs on the server from the SDK, and then added a bunch of support for doing things like batch API calls, which is a feature that's existed in the platform APIs for a long time, but that we've never really tooled with SDKs that you can use to really optimize the number of HTTP round trips you're doing, especially from resource-constrained devices like mobile phones. And finally, and you heard Constantine and others talk a bunch about this today, so I'm just going to kind of show a couple of code snippets but move on from it. Install attribution for optimizing app install ads. And the SDK is a pretty critical component of doing that optimization step. So here's an architectural diagram. If you look in the code, Jason did a version of this diagram that's ASCII art. but marketing wouldn't let us put the ASCII art on the slide. So this is now boxes. I mean, if you go to the there's a bug in Jason's. It's a minor bug, but there's a bug in Jason's diagram. So you should go to GitHub and pull the source and like look for that bug in the header. But this is that ASCII art diagram in boxes. And so there are 3 layers to this SDK. The bottom layer is core, and you can kind of think of this as the non-UI component-y like plumbing that makes it easy to authenticate a user, store a token, renew that token, ask for new permissions, deal with users that might delete your app from Facebook or something like that. The next 2 boxes are FB request and FB request connection. And you can think of these as essentially our like network layer for talking to the Graph APIs, the REST API, and FQL. And we'll go through examples of all this stuff. FB settings, which is a class where you can go and twiddle some switches, that kind of control some internal behaviors of the SDK. We'll look at that too. We move up from that, and in mine and Doug and Jason's previous lives in enterprise land, we would call these entities. Here we call them graph objects. And these are a set of protocols, what I kind of just, because of my Java background, think of as interfaces, that basically give us some strongly typed ways of representing data that comes out of the Graph API in a way that's really easy to consume in Objective-C because you get code completion and all these like nice to have things around base graph objects, FB graph user, FB graph place, so things that represent you as a user and your friends, or a place that you might check into or get out of places search. And then FB Open Graph Action. So if you're going to post actions, we have some strongly typed support for setting properties on actions and connecting actions to objects and so on and so on. And then we move up a layer from that, and we have a kind of core set of native UI controls that are, we've actually done a lot of work both on the user experience side as well as on the like data caching, optimizing the network round trip side to make it easy to wire up things like friend pickers, place pickers, present profile photos, because every time you do something with a user, you're often showing their profile photo or their friends' profile photos, or a place photo or a page photo or something like that. So we make it really easy to load those things asynchronously in the background, cache those images, make sure that if you reload the same one, we don't hit the network again unless we have to, and so on and so on. And then at the end of this is this FB Native Dialogues class. And one of the things we have there, or I think the only thing we have there right now, is the iOS 6 native share sheet. So permissions and auth. This is an interesting topic. I'm sure you have lots of questions about this. I'll take questions at the end where we can kind of talk through a bunch of this stuff. I think our high-level guidance here is basically to be thoughtful about how you ask users for permissions to do things, where the permission might be just to like click through and optimize your registration flow, or it might be asking permission to read their likes so that you can personalize some part of the experience in your app. Or where you're going to ask for permission to publish. And we're going to add, when we get all the way to the end of this little app we're going to build, we'll talk about asking for publish permission in line when I, as the user driving this computer, am going to try to publish something in the simulator. And so we'll talk through how to do that. But we find that how apps request permissions kind of significantly impacts the login dialog. And so this is the login dialog in iOS 6. This is the login dialog in the Facebook app, and there's a variant of this one that is the login dialog that you'd see if you open Safari. How this dramatically impacts conversions through the login dialog. Sorry, I have a bunch of things I want to say about that, but I want to get them in the right order. We find that separating the read and the write permissions kind of helps users start to get comfortable with getting started in an app when they don't necessarily understand what the app is going to do downstream. So Charles talked through some of this earlier and had this egregious worst case, one of these iOS 6 boxes that asks for a ton of stuff. Users obviously have trepidation when they walk up to one of those things because they don't want to get married before you start dating, to kind of reuse that analogy. We kind of prefer to see apps request permissions incrementally as needed, and I understand that that's something that a lot of developers have some concern about because we don't feel like it works as well. But we're also starting to see this model emerge in things like Android and iOS, where on iOS, when an app wants to read my location, it will pop up a location box and say, do you want to allow this app to read my location? And a lot of times you say yes because you want to take advantage of the feature of that app. And we think we want to start applying that same sort of thing to the permission model that platform like Facebook apps are using, or for how Facebook apps use platform. 4 possibilities for auth. We talked through these just to breeze through them again real quick. iOS 6, fast app switch, so like this thing with the Facebook app. and to Safari. Those are the three most common. The fourth is to use the web dialog for auth. We prefer that apps don't use this. We think it makes for a bad experience for everyone. People using apps, people using Facebook, these are the same people using your apps. The typing of the password into another place is both less secure from a phishing perspective, not that any of you would do that, but that bad actor apps will do some things like that and like fake those dialogues, which is obviously something that we work hard to prevent in platform integrity. So we prefer to see apps avoid using the web-based auth dialog. Okay, we're going to build this really ugly app right here. It's going to have a handful of features to it, basic share. Then we're going to make a couple of API requests after we've added login. So we're going to add this login button. We're going to pick some friends. We're going to pick a place, and then we're going to do a stream published story that kind of includes tags for both of those. The whole point of this is for explainability, not completeness. If people are interested, I can put the code up on GitHub. At this point, it's just sitting. We're going to build it here, and I have a couple kind of variants of it sitting on my laptop. So if you're interested in that, let me know. I'm going to skip this step, partly because you've already seen it walked through. But to get started with this whole thing, you go to the dev app, and you press Create an App. You add a little bit of information about your app name and a contact email. You give us a bundle ID, which is this thing, and that needs to match what we're about to go create in Xcode. I have this iPhone, iTunes Store, iTunes Connect app ID that I have just sort of reused for a bunch of things. And then I've enabled Facebook login and deep linking. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to deep linking, but deep linking is another thing that's important to know about because it helps drive organic growth through clicks on your stories back into your native mobile apps. So let's assume that all that stuff exists and get started with iOS 6 Basic Share. And we're going to do that by going to Xcode and creating a new project. Single view app, because we're not going to do anything other than a single view. And this is going to be called MDD for Mobile Developer Day. And I don't remember I never remember my bundle ID names. MDD Basic Session app. And so we're going to use storyboards for this. We're going to use Arc. The new SDK obviously supports that. And we're going to put that right there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go import a bunch of frameworks. And we have, some of you would say, why do we need to import frameworks? Can't you do that for me automatically? And the answer is yes, in general, we can, but we've heard horror stories of apps getting booted out of or rejected from the App Store because of reflectively loading frameworks. So we don't do any of that. So we basically, am I right about this? Okay. Just making sure. We used to do some of this. We don't do any of this anymore. So we ask you to explicitly add all the frameworks here, which, while a bit of a pain, saves you from getting booted out of the store. So we need accounts to get iOS 6. We need social to get the iOS 6 share sheet. We need ad support. We need, what else do we need? We need SQLite, because this is the backing store for our caches. And we need location, assuming we get to the place picker. So that's all that stuff. Let's add the Facebook SDK, which I conveniently have right here. And then we're going to pop over here and add the resource bundles. And there are two of these. One of them is optional, and it depends on whether you want to use one of the UI controls. And you can omit that, and that'll reduce the size of your binary when you submit that to the store. And I'm a bit of a neat freak, so we're going to organize these. Pop over here to our view controller. Can you read that in the back? Is that good in the back? Okay, sweet. Import the Facebook SDK header, and then let's build and just make sure everything looks like it's wired up correctly. Awesome. Okay, so everything's wired up correctly. So the first step we're gonna kind of take here is to call the iOS 6 share sheet. And this is going to work because I'm already actually logged into a recently reset simulator. And so everything I'm going to do is on the sim. But I'm already logged into my simulator, so I'm not going to have to go through that step just because that saves us a little bit of time. So we're going to pop over here to our storyboard. Don't want a table view controller. And we're going to grab a rounded rectangle button. We're going to put it right there. We're going to call it Basic Share. And we're going to go over here and wire it, the event up. And so this is going to do all the stuff that you're already familiar with. And now we're going to go over here and do something interesting with the API. We're going to call the native dialogues class. And unfortunately, this is going to get a little crowded, so I apologize for that. Oh, can you not see it? I'm not sure. Let me put a bunch of carriage returns at the end. Does that help? Yeah. Great. Sorry about that. Let me get through this, and then I'll explain it. Why they don't add semicolons at the end of this is beyond me. Okay, so what this basically is going to do is pop up the share sheet, and we're going to be able to post a story from that share sheet. I assume everybody's seen this work. Is anybody actually already using the share sheet? Is that because it doesn't have app attribution? Because it's iOS 6 only, that's right. Man, this always happens. I always forget to switch from iPad to iPhone because we don't want the iPad simulator. We want the iPhone simulator. So let's run this. And some of you that have played with this before are going to know what is about to fail. While this is coming up, on app attribution, we recently landed a change that kind of mitigates a bug that sort of fell between the cracks between us and Apple about how the share sheet attributes stories to apps. It is possible, yes, you're nodding your head, like you guys are familiar with this problem. It is now possible to do that story attribution, but in order to prevent some really nasty sort of spam and integrity issues on our side, we've had to kind of lock that down so that we know how to match up the iTunes Connect app ID with a Facebook app ID. If you have, basically send me both of those IDs in a message and what app you're working on, and I can get that connected for you. We just basically need to make sure that those two things match to avoid a bunch of abuse scenarios around it. I apologize for that. That's a really nasty hack. But if you just send that to me directly, I can get that stuff wired up for you, and it'll start working. Okay, cool. Okay, basic share. So we're going to go over here, click basic share, and as expected, that didn't work. And why didn't that work? Oh, you can't see this either. Oh, I can't make that one taller. I'm sorry. There you go. Okay, so let's go put the app ID in the plist. Awesome. And this is just a matter of taking this guy and coming over here, going to our plist. And doing that. Okay, so now I've got the app ID in the plist. So this kind of declaratively drops the app ID in the plist. And then all of these APIs, some of which actually take app ID if you, for some reason, need to pass one. But a lot of these APIs just kind of work better if you kind of declaratively stick this in the plist. And then we go looking for it and pull it into a bunch of places and save you the step of declaring a constant for it and then reusing that constant everywhere, or worse, manually copying and pasting it all over the place. Okay. Awesome. We can add location. Yes, I would like to use my current location. It's on the simulator. Let's see if we need to add. I have a GPX file for this. Let's see if it works. Yes. Let's see if that. Oh, didn't work. Let's do it this way. Well, let's just say we're at Alcatraz for now. And we're going to post to friends because for some reason the GPX didn't get picked up on it. Maybe I have to just restart the simulator. But we're going to post. Actually, I'm just going to take that off because that's a little misleading. So we're Mobile Developer Day. We are in Menlo Park. We are not at Alcatraz. That'd be a little funny. Okay, so that's the basic share sheet. So that's wired up now. This is how you can do organic sharing from your apps, but without requiring Facebook login. So the next step is to drop a login button in. And let's go do that real quick. So we're going to come back over here to our monolithic controller file. OK, so we've dropped this login view, and we haven't done anything with the delegate yet. We can run this thing, and we'll see a login button pop up at the top. OK, great. All those assets come out of one of those bundles, the one that's required to make those go, not the one that's optional. All those assets come out of that bundle, and then this thing will change from login to logout when we actually log in. But I'm going to save that for a second while we go back over here and implement the delegate. And we're going to need all of these. So we might as well just go ahead and save the time and add them all now. OK, so now we've got a set of methods that will get called back from that control when I'm logged in, when I'm logged out, and when we fetch user info. And you'll see one really interesting thing. Let me see if I can scroll this up. See one really interesting thing here, which is that in this callback, we're actually going to hand you back a strongly typed object that you can then pull fields off of. So let's go add a couple of little pieces of UI here so that we can print out a little bit of information and kind of make the app feel a little bit better from a user experience perspective. And we need a text view. And as much as I like lorem ipsum, we don't need lorem ipsum here. And we don't need to make it editable. And now we're going to change the background color so that thing actually stands out a little bit. Can you see the difference there? Text area, not text area? OK, cool. So now let's get these controls wired in to the controller. And now the text view. Awesome. So when I'm logged out, let's say that. And when I'm logged in, let's say this. So see that? Code completion. Much nicer than coding with maps. And what did I do wrong there? Oh, yes. Sorry. It's the Java developer in me. I always forget the @ sign. I will do that again, I promise, today. So this should come up and now reflect our login status. OK, hi, please log in to get started. So let's log in. And what we should see here is we should see an iOS 6 auth dialog box. And of course, if we go change our app name in the plist, well, you can put something here that has spaces in it and looks nicer. But this is going to basically ask for basic info, plus the other fields that come along with this on iOS 6. And so the app will basically have access to your name, your profile photo, your friend list, and a couple other things. So let's click through and say yes. And then we should see all this stuff change because all the right methods get called back. Perfect. So hi, Eddie, and log out. So we went off and we did a network round trip and brought back some data from Facebook. One of the little tips and tricks that I want you to take away from this, even if all this stuff is repeat, the one thing that I want to make sure you know about is that you can debug the network round trips. You can debug the network round trips that the SDK is doing by doing something like this. And of course, we need a Facebook SDK. So these are logging behaviors. And so we have a set of logging behaviors that are built into the SDK. And so if these are enabled, we will spit a bunch of stuff into the log. The one we're going to turn on here is the one for requests. If you in particular need to request or need to debug some tricky request that's actually failing, this one here log in with access tokens. Logging with access tokens, we will actually print the access tokens, but don't ship with this turned on. That's a terrible idea. But for now, we're going to debug everything we're going to debug all of our requests. And then we're going to say, here's where FB settings comes in. Set logging behaviors to that set. So now if we come back over here and shut this app down and run it again, we should see log spew down here in the bottom, which I think is going to make it hard for some of you to see. I'm sorry. Of the network requests that we're making when we go off and like start the app up. Yeah. Okay. So here, that's me coming back in that request for me. So that's great, but we're not very social yet, and we're not going to do much that's super social, but the next step is going to kind of demonstrate the way that we think about FB request and FB request connection. So what we're going to do is we're going to go make a request, and that request is going to be for all of my friends. And we're going to add a field to that request for all of those friends that come back. We want a true-false flag for whether or not those friends have installed this app, which clearly none of them have because we're building it on the fly here. And I wouldn't want them to anyway because it's kind of an embarrassment. So let's go make a request that brings back that installed flag and prints it out in that little text area that we saw earlier. So we're going to do this. So here are a set of requests. Requests for places search at coordinates. So this is basically the data access layer, if you will, underneath the place picker. It's like, go fetch me the data that you would otherwise put in the place picker, but just give it back to me directly because I want to drop it as pinpoints on a map or something like that. This is a request that would do a post. This is a request that would do a status update. This is a request to upload a photo. And so we have these like built-in requests for commonly executed actions that apps tend to do a lot. Once we've got one of them back, all we have is this little object that wraps up an API endpoint on Facebook. What we're going to need to do with it next is we actually need to like invoke it and make it do something. But first, we need to go tell this one to add the installed field. So string with format, got the @ sign this time. So we're going to put all of the existing parameters into that substitution. And then add the install flag. And the way we're going to do this is by so does that make sense to everybody? So we're basically going and getting the set of fields we would have otherwise requested, adding the installed flag to that set of fields. And this is a lot like going into the Graph API Explorer and like just typing fields onto the end of the URL. And so we're going to go fetch all of those friends with that installed flag for each friend. So now let's actually make the thing go. And the way that works is with this method. So every time you get a request, whenever you want to actually like make it do a network round trip, you call something that says start. And then you get this completion handler, and this completion handler will get called back when you're done. So let's do this. So we're going to go take each of those friends, put them into a big string, and kind of print out their install status. So let's just crank through that real quick. So you know how the Graph API does this funny thing where when you go and get a collection, it brings everything back wrapped up in a data array? That's what we're dereferencing here, is that data array. And so here we're going to use first name. And then here we're also going to use the installed field. And we're going to append that into our string. And then we're going to say UI text field, dot text equals string. So we're going to take, as soon as we indent it correctly, we're going to take all of the install status for all of my friends, put them into this big string, and then display that string in that text box. And so let's run that and see what happens. Ah, forgot the carriage return. Sorry. Let's do that again. There we go. Okay, so here are all those friends. We can scroll through this thing, and basically see the install status. All of them are going to say no because no one has installed our app yet. But that's the install status for all of those friends. But the whole point of this is to illustrate how requests work. Now, let's say I wanted to make this request, and then I wanted to get back like photo album names for 5 friends or something like that. I can make 2 of those request objects, hand them to an FB request connection, and execute them at the same time in a batch. And the programming model for dealing with that is exactly the same as the programming model for making this one request. Each of them is going to get its callback executed. If one of them fails, you'll see a failure. But the whole point is that making an individual request versus making multiple requests are all kind of work the same way. Okay, great. So we're kind of here. So we walked through basic post to feed. You can see I just remembered I need to walk through the block diagrams here. So we did the dialog. We did login, view, and FBSession. So we talked a little bit about that. Now we're going to go use the UI controls to pick friend and place. So can we come back to the display? Awesome. All right, so let's go back to Xcode. And let's drag a couple more buttons out here that we're going to use to pop the friend picker and then the place picker. And I got to be honest, before we get to place picker, I'm going to cheat a little bit on place picker because there's so much boilerplate that goes into it. I'm just going to go and copy paste it out of a gist on GitHub. So we need to wire these back into our view controller. There we go. So we need an action, click friends, and then we need another one for click place. Okay, cool. And now we're going to go back and just implement both of these. Okay, so we have these placeholders for these events. Let's go pop up the friend picker. So we need to load our friend data. So we're going to basically say that here. And the first time this runs, it's going to go off and make a big network request and bring back all enough friend information to populate the picker. And then each subsequent time it runs, it'll have a slightly more optimized behavior. Present modally from view controller, self. Let's make it animated so it's pretty. And then let's just print out if anything goes, if we click done. Awesome. Okay. So now let's run this thing and pick friends. Sweet. So just to reiterate what's going on behind the scenes here, the login button's popping up. It tells that we've already got an authenticated session. It creates this instance of this thing under the covers called FBSession, which is one of those boxes at the bottom layer of the architecture diagram. That thing is now on and with my access token, and then all these downstream requests that need to do things with that access token all just kind of work. So let's go pick friends. So here are all my friends. Now I'm on a Wi-Fi network. It's actually a pretty quick Wi-Fi network. So this goes a lot faster than if you're in San Francisco in the middle of a business day, where you would get back all the string data and then the friend pictures kind of slowly start to load in. As I scroll here, you see that we haven't brought all of the friend pictures in yet. But as we bring them in, we'll then stick them in that cache and hold on to them so that we don't have to go and redo this over and over again. And you guys know how the today's friend pickers, with the web dialogues and those kinds of things work? You know how long they take to render? When we come back to display this, it's instantaneous. And the reason it's instantaneous is because it's all native and it's all on the device. And like it seems silly to kind of keep harping on that, but it's just such a different departure for us in the way that we think about all this stuff. It's just such a better user experience. Okay, so we've got a friend picker. Now I'm going to cheat, and we're going to go off and copy and paste all this code from GitHub to get location wired up. And we need a couple of member variables, one for the location manager. And Jason and I were talking about this morning and decided to kind of do this in a way that like follows best practices. So we use one of these cache descriptors that basically is getting updated from the location manager in the background, rather than having every time you show the place picker, like having it pop up and do all of its network work. We're doing a bunch of stuff in the background to kind of optimize how this works. So now we need to go get the location manager started. And here I'm going to violate one of my own best practices, which is asking for permissions in line. We're just going to, the next time the app runs, it's going to pop up and just say, hey, do you want to let this app read your location? And the answer to that is yes, I do. But we're not going to do it in context. And then we're going to add the click place event handler. And then we're going to go add the callback methods for the location manager. So now let's just walk through all that stuff real quick, just so we're all on the same page. So click place, very similar thing to picking friends. We knew the thing up. We tell it that we're going to use a cache descriptor and that it shouldn't go off and do all of its default behavior. We tell it to then go load its data, and it's going to do that based on the cache descriptor that it has. And then we're going to present it modally and use the same sort of just like, hey, print success if I click done when I get called back. And now, fingers crossed that this actually works. We're going to go run the place picker, see, permission dialog. Permission dialog from iOS about sharing my location. Yes, I want to share my location. I'm going to click the place picker and up, hey, look, it worked. So here is Facebook. And this is like just Xcode goo that you guys are probably way more familiar with than I am. But here's place picker with Facebook HQ at the top. And we're going to go pick Facebook HQ. And then that has all the like on-campus restaurants and stuff too. And so that's kind of how place picker works. So as I like go move around, that will get updated in the background, and when somebody using the app then would see that place picker, like it would update with them. Okay, so we can log in, we can make network requests, we can pick friends, we can pick a place, and like the last step in all this stuff is to actually publish an action. So let's go publish an action. Sorry, publish an action. Publish a stream story. So we're going to go back here and add the final button. And that final button is share. And it's share not for like basic, I don't need to be logged in order to click this thing. But this is share for the like, I need to be logged in order to click this thing. And I need to also have granted the app some form of publish permission. And so here you see an example of how we have taken getting started with the app and basic info and requested that up front. And then downstream later, when I go to click the share button, we're going to then ask for permission from the user to publish an action. And this isn't necessarily always the right place to do it, but just for illustrative purposes in a very simple kind of explanatory app, it makes a lot of sense to do that here. So let's do the same thing and wire a click handler in on our .h file. Click share. And now let's come back over here. And so now we're going to wire that thing in here. Here you're going to see a use of FBSession. And remember that FBSession is this thing that the button, that the login view has created and is running along behind the scenes underneath us. Anytime we make network requests, it's using that access token. Same sort of thing here. What we're going to do is we're going to get the current active session. And this is basically a static that we store on the FBSession instance at the type level. And we store this thing in a static purely out of convenience. You don't have to store it here, but if you choose to use FBSession in a way where you don't store it here, you need to hold onto it in a place that you can get to and pull it out and pass it along to any of these like FB request methods or anything like that that needs to use the access token information that's inside FBSession. So now we're going to say reauthorize with publish permissions. And so what this is going to say, this is sort of the difference between read permissions, like go read my likes, go read my photos, and publish permissions, which are things like upload photos for me, do a status update for me, post actions for me. And this is a little hard to read. I'm going to reformat this and make this wider in just a second. And we're going to use fancy new Objective-C syntax for arrays, which is awesome. We're going to post to friends. And we're going to have a completion handler. And what we do in this completion handler, and let me reformat this a little bit so it's a little easier to read. So we assume that when we get into this completion handler, in this case, we're going to assume we've been granted the permission. If you weren't granted the permission, you can like go change a nux or explain to the or do whatever makes sense in the context of your app to educate users around what they're missing out on. But here we're going to assume that we've got that permission, and then we're going to go do a post. But in order to do a post, we need to have fields for all the data that we just pulled out of the place picker and the friend picker. So let's go wire those up too. That's a couple more properties. Oops. So we're going to hold on to the place when it comes out of the picker. We're going to hold on to the friends when that comes out of the picker. And we're going to pass that stuff along to the stream publish call. And so now we need to actually go hold on to those things. Oops, that's basic share. We're going to do that here. And so here is another example of strong typing. So because we're dealing with the friend picker, the selection is this array, and it's this array of friend IDs, or user profile IDs. And now we're going to do the same thing. Sorry. And now we're going to do the same thing here. And so here we see another example of strong typing. We're going to get back this FB graph place, which is the place that got picked. So maybe we don't want to use the place ID. We want to use the place name. In this case, we really care specifically about the place ID, and we'll read that out later. So now this class is holding on to both the selected friend IDs and the selected place. And we're going to go down here and now use those. And the way we're going to use those is we're going to do another one of these magic static static requests. And in this case, we only need to do one request. We don't need to like build a batch for application logic. And we're going to do this start for post status update. So start is our pattern again for all these statics. And we're going to start for posting a status update versus uploading a photo versus any of the other things that you might start for. And because we have place ID and tags, we're going to use this one instead of this one, which just doesn't take those things. And so we're going to post a status, and our status is going to be at Mobile Developer Day 2012 with a working app, assuming that this works. And now we're going to go add a place ID. And so this is a string. Whoops. We're going to use our friend IDs, and we're going to do we're going to print something if we get an error, and if we don't, sorry, thank you. And here we're going to print the result. And we're mostly going to print the result just to kind of illustrate that what's coming back here is the same exact thing you would get out of doing this in curl or with a server-side API or something like that, just so we can see the post ID. All right. We think that this is going to work. So we're going to pick some friends, and I'm going to just tag. Let's see, who can we tag quickly? Let's tag. Let's tag Doug, and Constantine's in here somewhere. I know. We need search. We're going to do that. We have a search box at the top of the friend picker. We just haven't got to it yet. And then let's add Jason. So I've got 3 friends I'm going to tag. Let's pick a place. Oh, I don't think this is going to pick it back up. Yeah, it did. It picked it back up. Facebook HQ. So we're going to send that status message with those tags here. And let's try the share button and see what happens. So here's the app asking for permission, again, through an iOS 6 login dialog. Here's an app asking for permission to post on my behalf. And so we say post to your friends, and so that's the expected audience. And one of the things that, again, we strongly suggest around the permission model is to be really, really clear with people what audience they're going to be posting to when they post. And we're going to go post. And let's see if that worked. Awesome. So here's that post. This is a stream published post at Mobile Developer Day 2012 with a working app. Tags Jason and 2 others at Facebook HQ. So that's like 135 lines of code, something like that. And a lot of it like location manager, 140. And a lot of that location manager kind of just like set up and tear down. And so that brings us to the end of our like simple sample app. Can we go back to slides, please? Oh, sorry, I skipped the post to feed at the end. Post to feed kind of illustrates a bunch of these things and getting all that stuff wired together. Session, graph objects, FB graph place, FB graph user, FB request connection, and FB request. So that's kind of what we covered there. All right, wrapping up. Key SDK features. On the left are going to be type names and then descriptions. The type names are in Courier, just so that to kind of help you remember what those things look like. Or which ones we're talking about here. FBSession, so single model for dealing with session and login and tokens and renewal and permissions and when bad things happen. Jason's going to talk a lot about error codes, so when bad things happen to access tokens, which actually should be the title of an entire talk. FB requests, so abstracting out these API requests and providing strongly typed access to a lot of the data that's coming back from them. Through FB graph object, which is sort of the foundation, the sort of top of the hierarchy for all these strongly typed requests, so both data going in as well as data coming back, because you can also post FB open graph actions, which are kind of strongly typed actions. So we can do strong typing in both ways. Native UI controls, FB friend picker, FB place picker, and we looked at both of those here. FB login view, we looked at that. We did not look at FB user settings view controller, which if you have like connecting to Facebook features buried underneath the like settings part of your app, this is a kind of turnkey UI component that you can use for that. It may not be what you ultimately want to ship with, but it's just a kind of quick way to get started with that. FB profile picture view. So this is that loading profile pictures in the background and caching the results. This probably shouldn't be last, especially for those of you that invested in apps that were built on the 2.x SDK. Everything we just looked at can be incrementally adopted from 2x. And we went through a fair bit of work through the summer, both on iOS and on Android. And so Greg will be talking about that next door to make sure that all this stuff was backwards compatible so that you can bring your apps in and start incrementally taking advantage of these features, but without having to throw away everything you've already done. And then finally, the mobile app install add attribution stuff, which, yes, is a mouthful. And that is published by making this API call. And Jason, actually, one question. Will this pick up the app ID out of the plist? OK. So you don't have to provide an app ID here. We'll actually pick that app ID up out of the plist if it's not there. And that's all I have. So a set of resources here. Is anyone interested in having the code in this app? You don't have to be. OK. So I'll post it on GitHub. My GitHub handle is EKONEIL, EK O'Neill. And I'll get it there tonight or something like that. But it'll basically just be raw, everything we just went through. And you can suck that in and play around with that in Xcode if you want to. But thanks for being a great audience. And I think we have 7.5 minutes left for questions. And we'll be back at the end of the day. Doug, correct me if I'm wrong. We'll be back at the end of the day for another hour of questions too. So if we don't get through everything now, don't worry, we'll get to it. And Jason, I'm going to bring Jason up as technical backup for me. Yeah, if you guys want to go ahead and yeah.
So my question is, I want to get all my Facebook friends who have installed my app, and will I saw you demo figuring out the field for the install field. So if my friends did not install from the App Center, they install directly from the App Store, will the install field indicate yes or no?
Yes. Yes, the install field will indicate whether or not your friend has installed some app. Like if you're inside of an app and you read the install field, it will indicate whether or not a friend has installed or not installed that app, independent of how they installed it.
Just to be clear, if your friend installs the application but they don't accept the GDP, either in the App Center or in the app itself, it won't say that it's installed. So this doesn't track whether or not the user actually downloaded the app from the App Store or not.
Yes.
It just indicates whether or not they have accepted our permissions dialog,
Yes.
either from the App Center or some other place.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Sorry for the confusion there. That's right.
Now, that said, we do provide a mechanism if you do include our SDK for you to attribute. There's a logging method for when a user does install the application. You'll be able to let us know, and that's actually how we do ad tracking. So that's how we know whether or not we have successfully driven an install for your application.
And that was that last line of code in that last slide that had all that courier on it. Giselle, do you? Yeah,
Great, thanks for the great demo.
Thanks.
So if I'm targeting iOS 6 and pre-iOS 6 at the same time, is there anything about this that I need to do differently, handling different versions of the OS the same?
I did not plant that question, but that is an excellent question. And Jason, you should feel free to jump in here too. Yes, a couple of things. One, the iOS 6 share sheet only works, obviously, if I'm logged into iOS 6 on the device. And so if I'm not logged into, and this isn't an iOS 6, non-iOS 6 thing, it's actually am I logged into Facebook on iOS 6 versus not? And so the not case is everyone else that isn't logged in on iOS 6, everyone who's still on iOS 5, and everyone who's still is on iOS 4.3. So that share sheet only works if I'm logged into iOS 6. If you're not, we don't have a kind of down-level method, which is typically our philosophy in the SDK, and there are a variety of reasons for why we didn't do this or haven't done this yet. We don't have a down-level method for showing a dialog, so you would basically need to check and see, can I show this or not? And if you can't, you could fall back and kind of use the web dialog as a fallback if you were doing sharing for users that weren't logged in. Go for it.
Yeah. That is correct. A couple of details. You can call the method for the share sheet if you're not in iOS 6, and it'll just return false, no. So you don't actually have to check that up front. It checks for you. If you call it and you're on iOS 6 and the user is not tossed for the device, it does actually pop up UI, so I don't want anybody to be surprised by that. But it's kind of like an advertisement for signing on with Facebook on the device. It actually pops up and says, hey, you're not signed on to Facebook from the device. And would you like to go to the settings? And you click that and it will take you to the settings. Anyhow, that was it.
No, that's good. I can show you that if you want to see it. But yeah, go. Yeah, sure.
So we were taking advantage of Facebook having some more COPA compliance to use Facebook login and skip our own kind of COPA requirements. So now that Facebook is looking to allow under 13 age users, is there any way through the SDK for us to detect that this person is under 13?
I am going to defer that one to Swain or Doug.
So you can check the age range.
You can check the age range of a user, and user objects have birthday attached to them, but you can check the age range of the user.
Okay, but in that,
yeah, let's take that one offline and talk about that.
In the 2x SDK, you
Where
had
is this?
to renew your access token, or when the app started, you should say I want to extend my access token.
Yep.
What code does that, or is Do you guys
This is one of the
listen to
beautiful things of the 3X SDK, and Jason can go into the technical details here, and talk your ear off about them.
And that's our last question, Eddie. Just so you know, that's our last question.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We do that automatically for you in the background. Every time you make an API request to us, we basically piggyback along, slipstream along this request to extend the access token.
So how long will the access token last, though? Like, let's say the user doesn't do anything Facebook-y for a couple days. Will they just be logged out of Facebook, and then they'll have to log back in? Because they're still technically in our app.
The basic idea is that the access tokens will expire over a period of time if users don't engage with that app. And it's not that the user then becomes disconnected from the app. Like, we think of these things as basically a pair of users, a user-app pair is kind of how we refer to them. It's not that we disconnect the pair and the user has to go back through this, like, auth dialog thing. They basically need to just keep engaging with the app, and if they stop engaging from the app, at some point they have to like click through a yes, I want to keep doing this box. And it's just it's a reasonably long period of time, but we don't really commit to a time frame for it. But it's longer than a couple of days.